his mind is conscious of another attack of colic, and he begins to behave in the required terms with food and drink, because he can anticipate his pain. He can anticipate his disease, and he anticipates many things like this. See, when an animal is lying on the street, if you give him a kick, it goes away. Next day, if you call it and give some food, it comes to you and takes the food. If you do the same thing with a human being, on the first day, if you give a kick to a human being and send him out, and next day, if you call him and promise that you will give him Moshe, he will never come to you. In turn, he will also give a kick. That is, impressions retain in mind through time. This is not possible with the animal kingdom in all levels. Impressions are carried only as habits in animals, whereas in the human being, impressions are carried directly, not as habits but as recollections. Children also have the way of behaving like animals. When the mother punishes the child one day, the next day the mother gives a chocolate to the child. The child is pleased. It is not the case with a grown-up person. If you give a slap to a grown-up person, and next day if you give a chocolate, he will never take it, but he will give you 2 slaps. So we find a similarity in children to the behavior of the animals. So we can mark the evolution of consciousness from animal to human being. In the case of the human being, it is becoming self-conscious, whereas an animal can never be self-conscious. And here is a big jerk of consciousness, a critical situation in consciousness. The human consciousness is given a seed of understanding which is not given to the animal and the plant kingdom. That seed contains what we call discrimination. That is, the power to select and the power to reject. This is not given in the case of any animal or plant. This is given for the human being because it is more advanced, and because the human being is conferred with some responsibilities by nature. Just as when you are appointed as a secretary of some big industry, you will be given cars and telephones and buildings. Some privileges will be given to you because you are expected to conduct the part of the business by yourself. And whenever the manager is absent, you are expected to take a decision and telephone. You are not expected to wait and sleep until the manager comes and then find out and then telephone. Certain amount of responsibility is conferred upon you. That change takes place by the consciousness of the human beings. When the animal becomes the human being, there is the privilege of certain mental faculties and there is certain responsibilities and duties. The difference, one of the differences, let us try to understand shortly. In the case of animals, they cannot eat more than what is needed by the stomach. They cannot drink more than what is needed. And they cannot eat what is not good and suitable to them. They cannot drink what is not to be taken by them. Every animal eats and drinks only according to its need, and you can't make all animals to eat everything. According to its birth and its need, it selects its food without its own knowledge, and it rejects what is not its own. But the animal is not deciding, but nature is deciding for it, and nature is protecting the animal. If you telephone to an animal that a very big officer who is very important in the city is asking it to eat more because the important person is celebrating his son's marriage, if you ask the cow to eat more grass, it never eats because it cannot.
Parce qu'elle ne peut pas le faire.
That's why we find the animals are not going into disease as frequently as the human being goes. We should not be ashamed of knowing some facts, because it is the knowledge of facts that makes us live better. In the case of a human being, the choice is left to himself. If a friend telephones that his son's marriage is being celebrated, if by that time I would have finished my lunch, again I don't mind taking a second lunch with my friend for the sake of formality and etiquette. And this is not possible with the animal. So there is a big critical point between the consciousness of animals and the human consciousness. The human being undergoes a big crisis during the first few thousands of births in his evolution. He does not know whether he has to oblige his friend or his club or his company, or he has to honor nature in the shape of his own appetite and thirst. So he makes a wrong choice, and he pays the penalty in the form of disease and suffering and the medicine. He has to pay for the pain. He has to pay to the doctor, pay to the pharmacist, and sometimes he has to pay to the surgeon. So many are the penalized payments for each transgression, because nature is always the same and it has no compromise with the human beings. The facts of nature are always the same. It is for us to understand the law of nature, and since nature is unchangeable, we have to keep tune with nature, and some day or other we have to make a compromise with nature, and nature never compromises with us. Just as the persons traveling in a ship, though they can run in all directions on the deck of the ship, they have to commonly accept the direction in which the ship is going. They can't go against the direction which the ship is going. All their movements on the deck are subordinate to the total movement and the direction of the ship. If we do not understand it properly, we call it fate. We wrongly understand that there is something cruel about nature and we are suffering. Sometimes we feel that God is cruel with us, as if we are so important as to be separately noticed by God. It is all sheer ignorance that makes us think. Sometimes we believe that the planets are causing some great harm to us. The astrologue makes our horoscope and says Saturn is not good for you, and Mars is looking at you with an evil eye, so you have stomachache. We think that Mars is our enemy, or Saturn, the poor old man, is our enemy. But these planets are like the officers in the police department and the law. If the thief thinks that the police is a cruel fellow, it is his incorrigible ignorance. He has to rectify himself and to behave better. Then he will understand the benevolence of the law and order. And then he will understand why the police department is there. It is there to guide us and protect us, not to punish us. To protect the well-behaved, they have to punish the ill-behaved. This is all a copy and imitation from nature. Because in nature, all these departments are working. The human being has to use his discrimination, and it is for this purpose the human being is given discrimination. And the animals are not given. It is not necessary for the animals. Because they are protected by nature in the name of instinct. And the human being has grown above instinct. Just as the grown-up child is allowed to go into the city by the parents and to take his own decisions about his own behavior, so also the human being is the grown-up child of nature on this earth. And the human being is expected to understand all these levels of consciousness. First of all, he is expected to know the law of nature and once again begin to obey the law of nature. You will see that the story of the prodigal son is an allegory of the human evolution. He has gone away from his father.
S'est séparé de son père.
Because he wanted to behave independently. That means from the one background consciousness, man can deviate and behave according to his own likings. But the result is he loses all his kingdom. He becomes poor. Means poor of his health, poor of his social relationships, poor of everything. When I begin to behave according to my own liking, can you spare me? No one can spare. It's very difficult to spare the fellow who wants to behave according to his own sweet will. So for some thousands of years we behave independently in terms of our food and drink, our sleep and rest, and our behavior of sex. But every time we transgress the law of nature, every time we misbehave, we are penalized in the form of suffering and pain, not by pain, but by the act done by us. What we have done begins to penalize us, and nothing else in nature or in surroundings penalizes us. Then we will begin to understand the law of cause and effect, and the law of compensation, and the law of retribution. These three aspects of the law put together are called the law of karma in Indian scriptures. We will understand that nature is neither cruel nor inconsiderate. Nature is always the same, it is behaving in its own way, working as the cosmic nature in the space background, working as the solar system working as the solar nature in the solar system, working as the planetary nature in this earth, working as the mineral nature among the minerals, plant nature among the plants, animal nature among the animals, and human nature among us, the human beings. Further, it is working as the national nature among the different nations, each nation behaving differently from the others, racial nature among the different races, each race of human beings behaving in a different way from the other races, and finally, individual nature, according to which each individual behaves differently from others. Just as the same wood from the same tree is taken and made into 2 or 3 chairs where different people sit. Three people who are mutually enemies can sit on the three chairs. But it is the same wood from the same tree. Similarly, the same human nature is making individual blends separate. Each individual is behaving according to his own nature. And this is the fate of the human animal through the first few thousands of births. He is helpless. His knowledge cannot help him. All the good things we learn through our education cannot help us. They can help us only as far as our individual nature permits. Because the individual nature has our likes and dislikes. We can't make ourselves like what we do not like. This is beyond logic, beyond education, and beyond training. And the most modern branches of educational science are till today failing about this aspect. And there is a better understanding of this aspect which we call behavior. When consciousness has evolved up to the plane of the human kingdom, when it left man as a rationalistic being on this earth, when man is able to behave independently according to himself, he is still behaving only according to his own individual nature and not independently. He is like an animal fixed to a pillar, a post, but with a very, very long elastic rope. He can run and jump. He can eat or starve. And he can love and he can produce children. He can think according to his own individual taste. But he never feels where he is tied down. Because the string is too long and it is elastic. But yet it controls him in the form of his behavior. Then we want a science which enlightens us about behavior. And this science of behavior is absent till today in the present psychology. With due respects, the present psychology is a science of problems very well analyzed, without solutions suggested. It is at best a science of problems without solutions. We want a science of solution. And what are we to do with this evolved consciousness of the human being? Now we leave this subject here and start a new paragraph. Every one of us can behave in his own individual way. And his consciousness is working in the objective world as much as it is working in the subjective world. Whenever he thinks about himself, it is working subjectively. Whenever he begins to think about others and his environment, it is working objectively. Though we are not able to discriminate the boundaries between the subjective and the objective. We do not understand where the subjective world ends and the objective world begins. But yet we feel the two worlds, the world within and the world outside. We are behaving according to the individual nature, and we are using the faculty of habit in educating ourselves. What we call education is nothing but habit. When we write a book, we are using the habit as a graphic representation. When we are reading the various textbooks of the various subjects, various sciences and philosophies of this world, it is only the knowing of others' thoughts and reproducing them. When we call ourselves a scholar, that means we reproduce others' thoughts, many in number. It is only the faculty of habit that we are using. Instead of calling it habit, we are calling it education. That is why we are not able to change ourselves from the deviations we have made from nature. We see around us all the world is behaving naturally. We see the animals and the plants and the birds not having the problems we are having, but we are not able to live without problems. And we want to be free from problems. We are discovering the various branches of information. For example, the political science, the social science, the psychological sciences, the various humanities and the various sciences of nature. But we are not able to live without our problems. This is the crisis of human evolution. This is happening because any one of these problems are not from the nature, but they are created by ourselves. Every one of our problems is self-created and self-proposed. So the solution also should be self-proposed and self-created. Until we propose and we create our own solution, our education can never help us to come out of our own problems. Because these problems were never with us when we are born. They are made by us and created by us. Just as a person digging a ditch and a big hole in his own compound and walking in the night falls into the ditch without knowing, we are making our own problems and making our life difficult to live on this earth. No use of complaining against anyone. We should get at a science which gives us a solution from this. That science has been discovered thousands and thousands of years ago by the ancient nations. It is for us to find out, investigate and accept and follow. When we begin to observe the nature of our mind and how it behaves, we will come to know certain facts. Much of the activity in our mind is reaction to the environment and not its own action. We find the two things different, and we find that we are indulged in the activity of reaction, having no time for our own action. When you are there in your presence, I behave in a different way. When my people are there, I behave in a different way. In the presence of my father, I behave in a different way. In the presence of my wife, I behave in some other way. With my sons, I behave in a different way. As long as I am awake, I am exposed to the conditioning of the environment, and I am behaving according to the conditioning and not an original behavior. Is there at all an original behavior? If there is, can we trace it? Can we begin to behave according to ourselves without any conditioning? This should be the question of a real student of solutions. The answer is yes, we can behave. We can behave according to our own nature. If we go to the shop where hats are being sold, is it correct if I purchase a hat according to the dimensions of your head, simply because I have gone to the magazine with you? Or is it true that I should purchase a hat with the dimensions of the head of the shopkeeper? If that were to be the case, then only we should behave according to the environment. So all our behavior according to the environment is only conditioned behavior. It is only reaction and not action. let us try to know what action is, where action is, by doing which we do according to our own nature, not being conditioned by the nature of others. This is one step. The next step is we should enter into the human nature and we should begin to behave according to human nature, not according to the conditioning by others and not according to our individual nature. So, a real student travels away from the environment consciousness into his natural individual consciousness. And
individuel.
After some time, he travels into his own personality consciousness. There is the difference between the two. The individual knows only its own wants. If I remember my own appetites, I will be careful about my own appetites and I will develop my economics according to my own requirements. This is called individual existence. All the sciences and arts I develop in the name of education will be conditioned by personal fears and personal needs, and these can never protect me. After some time, I begin to expand into the personality consciousness. The difference is in the personality consciousness, I remember that you too have an appetite just as I am having it, that you too should have a house just as I have it, you too should have a sense of security just as I have it. Then I begin to live for you and you begin to live for me. This is the origin of the personality consciousness, the next awakening. And virtues will be developed on the social level, but on a commercial basis. I have to be useful to you because you have to be useful to me. I must develop friendship with my neighbor because someday I need the friendship of my neighbor. This is the beginning of virtues. That is virtues on the commercial scale. This is what we call marketing the virtues. Some thousands of births we are evolved through this marketing consciousness. Of course, we falsely call ourselves virtuous, but the real virtue is only the utilitarian aspect. An innate timidity to live makes us virtuous. A sense of insecurity which is hunting us keeps us virtuous. Just as a chain of iron keeps the dog to its place. But whenever a moment occurs when I am given more liberty, I am sure to misbehave and transgress over your own rights. Because our virtues are based on commercial scale and not the higher consciousness.
Yeah.
This is what is called the personality consciousness. So from the individual consciousness, we develop into the personality consciousness. We want the next awakening. That is the awakening which is found in all the prophets and the avatars of the world, which is not so very properly understood by us. When we are not properly prepared or evolved to understand the avatars and the prophets are the masters of wisdom who are guiding this human kingdom, we begin to think in strange terms about them.